Hey everyone, this is Josh from Solopreneur Grind for episode 84 of the Solopreneur Grind podcast. I'm lucky to be joined by Hooman Radfar, CEO and founder of Collective.com. Hooman, thanks very much for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Awesome. Hooman, can you please tell us just a little bit about yourself to get started, and then I'm excited to dig into the backstory.
Sure. So I'm a Persian, born in London and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So you'll hear the accent there. And in terms of my work profile, entrepreneur turned venture capitalist, turned back to entrepreneur. So I'm sure we'll dive into what exactly that means.
I hope so, especially because in the last year or two, I've found myself a little bit more involved in that world that I had no idea about. So I'll definitely want to dig into that. But Human, can you talk about so in your case, where were you maybe in your early 20s or when you were finishing up your education? And when you did, what did the first bit of your professional career look like?
So my career in some part was heavily shaped by the dot com. So I'd gone to school all in Pennsylvania in the US. So I grew up, as I mentioned, in Pittsburgh. For undergrad, I was at the University of Pennsylvania. And during that time, it was the peak of the dot com. So when I graduated, actually, um, it was very difficult to find a job. Uh, it was not as en vogue as it is now to kind of be in tech. In fact, it was quite the opposite. And that drove in large part my decision to go to graduate school. I really enjoyed engineering. I studied computer science and economics at Penn, but that's where I actually had gotten the bug for startups. But unfortunately, I got the bug and then the bottom fell out. And so I went to graduate school to further my education. I would say lick my wounds. And I went to Carnegie Mellon back on the other side of the state in Pittsburgh. And I spent 2 years doing my master's there. And afterwards, my office mate at Carnegie Mellon and I decided to start my first company. So from a professional vantage, I've actually never had a career, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. I've always either started companies or, been investing. And so I would say I'm fairly non-traditional.
Right. So what was the conversation like, literal and kind of going on in your head when you were talking to your friend about starting that first company?
I think both of us had a pretty deep passion for the internet and
Hmm.
networking at the time. So I was researching, I would say, the social networking space and market. It was, we graduated from grad school in 2002. So when we were in school, the web had burst onto the scene, but it was kind of contracting in terms of the commercial interest. So, but the academic interest continued to flourish, and the internet, as you know, just kept chugging along in the background. It didn't care
Hmm.
that the stock market had changed, and we were really excited in what the potential was for it. So, his research area at the time was really about web services and how could the web move from a publishing platform. It was really a magazine, like an interactive magazine, to a platform for development. There wasn't a lot of active development going on in the web service space. It was really more, I would say, down the stack. My research was in the social networking space. And so, we'd always talk about ideas, where the internet was going to go, where technology was going to go. And when push came to shove at the end of graduate school, we put our heads together and said, hey, listen, we didn't get to play in the first dance, and we want to give it a crack. And so, when we graduated, we started our first company, but it was very different than the environment now. In particular, because we were in Pittsburgh, it was post.com. It was still pretty dark ages for the internet. So we were hacking about, doing consulting. It was pretty old school, right? Now you can apply to YC and off you go. And there's a number of accelerators, pretty amazing ecosystem. But we spent a year or two just experimenting before we figured out the direction.
Right. And so you alluded to consulting. So do you mean you were pretty much, one half of the day, the two of you were working on this new idea, new company, trying to get it off the ground, and maybe like the other half trying to do consulting work to actually pay the bills so you could stay afloat?
Well, we tried to tie them together. So we
Right.
tried to find projects that were in line with where we were going. And, to some degree, I think we had some success. But in hindsight, the work that we did in consulting ended up priming us, to work together, keep the lights on, but wasn't ultimately the direction that we went into when
Right.
we finally raised, venture capital and found a direction that we wanted to go in 2006.
Right. So would you recommend that to people now? I mean, you mentioned the YCs, the other incubators. What do you think the trade-off or the pros and cons of each would be? And so let's say you were to start, let's say you got pushed into today's day and age. Would you do the same thing? Would you take the incubator route, or what would you recommend to others?
I think it depends in part on your level of conviction, your risk profile. It's so hard to give advice, and I think people who give advice too readily are often uh, basically conveying, what their experience was, and the context changed. So I
Hmm.
think it depends really on where that entrepreneur is. If you have a concept that you're very passionate about, it's something that maybe you've even tested. I would say you have a higher chance of success by going 100% into it.
Right.
But look, when the world is the world is the world, right? Do you have cash in the bank? Can you afford to take that kind of risk? Do you have that level of conviction? And so I think a lot of great companies get built by people experimenting on the side. Something takes off where they get some conviction and then, jumping into it. It really is about, your context. So I think
Hmm.
people need to find the path that works for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's great advice. Awesome. So Human, can you tell us what happens next? You alluded to you eventually raised some money. What ended up happening with that company?
So we raised our first seed round from some folks that were in the DC, Virginia area. You may know this, but AOL was based there.
Hmm.
And at the time, AOL was still, it was coming off the .com, but that was the internet. That's how you got
Hmm.
on the internet.
I
And
still remember
so,
those dial-up days. Yeah.
I mean, I think people really don't give credit to the innovation and to the contributions of that company to the internet. I mean, think about it. It wasn't just how you connected. Today we connect through, at least in the States, like a Comcast or Verizon or AT&T. It was also how you browsed. It was how you
Hmm.
chatted. It was like everything. It was the browser. It was the social network. I mean, you had AIM, you had chat rooms. So a lot of the groundwork for what we use today was, you know, laid out by those tools. And at any rate,
Hmm.
um, the founders there were early investors. It was absolutely transformational to my life and career to work with, people like that who had seen the beginning and actually had a vision for the future. And then Phil Bronner, who was VC there. And so we met them and we moved to Pittsburgh. I mean, it took us like a week or two. It was, packed our bags, bounced, and we were
Hmm.
ready to go. And the company was it was a ride. It was a ride. So there was that Web 2.0 wave that happened right then. Social networking was taking off. You had that battle royale to see who was going to win what was ultimately a very, very large prize, as you can see now through how large Facebook is.
Hmm.
And we were very lucky to be part of it. So the company ultimately became Add This, which we grew. It was a marketing automation platform. We started with free tools for website developers to help them make their sites social. Eventually went into other tools, email capture, list building. But we went with the freemium model, and it was a ride. But when at the time where we sold it to Oracle, I think we were on 15 million websites.
Wow.
We reached about 2 billion unique users through those websites and processed about 1 trillion page views per day. And so, really fantastic experience. Learned a lot about the early internet, about monetization on the internet, the models. It was awesome, but it was hard. It was hard because, in between 2006 and our exit, we had one of the largest recessions in the history of the country. And that was
Right.
just, I would say, it was a fantastic lesson in hindsight, but at the time, traumatizing.
Yeah, I bet. Could you summarize? I could only imagine the things you learned, the lessons that came out of that one experience, and we haven't even talked about what comes next in terms of your career. But for those especially who are at the beginning or even thinking about starting a tech company, what would you say are the two or three key lessons you learned from that, or even suggestions that you would give to tech co-founders right now?
It's a great question. I think, there's a wealth of lessons, but I think the first is um, really be patient. Um, it doesn't happen overnight. And I know everyone says that, but everything starts with humble beginnings. And it's unclear how large it can get, how small it could get, but be patient with yourself. And that leads to kind of the second piece of advice is, have an attitude of continuous learning. It's something I do now.
Mm-hmm.
You really don't know what you don't know. Every startup is a fresh experience. And yes, I have some tools that I didn't have before. I have a network I didn't have before, capital that I didn't have before, which of course puts me at an advantage from where that, young 20 something was at that point. But it doesn't mean that you know how to run your business at this point in time. I mean, think of how much the world has changed since then. Yes, we have some amazing things that make it easier to start a company, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. We have to work and hire remotely. In the
Mm-hmm.
case of people on the west coast of California, we went through wildfires, which have impacted the air. You couldn't go outside. There's been tremendous social unrest. Show me the playbook for that.
Mm-hmm.
Show me that the entrepreneur's been through that. And the answer is you haven't. So you
Yeah.
have to have an attitude of continuous learning, and you have to have that patience. And I would say the last piece is just really make sure that you approach it as a journey, and then it's as much about the downs as the ups. And sometimes the things that you think are these really challenging, tough moments are when the door gets burst open widely, and you just, I remember I had deal with a very large tech company, and they were, as you grow as a company, you often have multiple overtures from some of the larger companies to buy you. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
this was the exit. I was mentally ready to go. And they had shifted to say, hey, look, the exit doesn't make sense, but we can do a great deal with you. And the deal was so lucrative. And at the time, I remember being so upset. But that deal ultimately gave us so much money, and it was non-dilutive financing and really improved our valuation. So you just have to I really believe that startups can be a fantastic tool for personal growth and development, if you let them. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but you have to be patient.
Absolutely. Which is almost ironic to hear. I mean, I totally agree, and those are great lessons. It's almost ironic to hear be patient when you think high growth tech company, and it's like, oh, investors want to see this, and the numbers have to be huge, and then you hear be patient. But I do think that's important for any type of business. So that's those are awesome takeaways. So Hooman, what happens next? You do end up getting acquired. What was that experience like? And then what happens, right? You're so young, you've had such an awesome experience and a great outcome. What does that feel like? And then how do you even approach kind of the next step of your career?
Well, I was lucky. I had moved to California prior, just right before, from the East Coast. I transitioned from running the company day to day to a chairman role, and worked with the CEO there, and he did a really great job. He was the COO. We promoted him, and he was the one that ultimately landed the plane at Oracle. And I was when I was on the West Coast, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. Now, interestingly enough, there's this like non-determinism in the universe that you just can't possibly predict. So, one of the friends I had made and the person that I had met through my first chapter was the founder of a company called StumbleUpon, also
Mm-hmm.
Canadian, Garrett Camp. And Garrett and I met when he was running that company because, one of the fantastic parts of being a platform that connects to all the social networks and connects to all the advertising networks is you get to meet these innovators who are facing the consumer. And Garrett was one of them. And Garrett had founded a company called Uber, obviously, and he was not going to be full time. And he decided he was going to work on this project, Expa, and Expo was going to be a platform for entrepreneurs to build their companies, but also for us as the partnership to invest in their companies, help further them. And he wanted it to be something unique. And so I had already kind of been hanging out with him, and I decided this is a place I can work for a bit. I think if you would have told me at the time, I would have spent 6 years of my life there. I would have said you're crazy, but not because I didn't enjoy it, but you just didn't think that way. I thought to myself, well, this is fun. We're having a good time. We're helping all these entrepreneurs. But yeah, I ended up spending a long time there helping build it out. We did 2 funds, and ultimately, prior to this company I'm working on now, Collective, which actually came out of Expo, and it was a company we started and funded out of Expo. I ran investments there, so it was really a tremendous experience. But I think each time you're presented with opportunities. There's entrepreneurs have Being an entrepreneur is really about optimizing opportunities and
Hmm.
taking advantage of them. And at that time, I think that was an amazing opportunity to help build that up, be a founding partner alongside him, and it was really great. It's been really great.
Very cool. Well, how do you suggest that people try to make those opportunities now, right? You mentioned COVID. We'll date this episode quickly, so it's early November 2020. We're in the midst of it. It seems like it's not going away yet. And I totally agree because most of the kind of like good or lucky things that happened for me just kind of happened by obviously some luck, but I do believe that you can make your own luck by getting out there, talking to the right people, meeting the right people, networking. How do we do that in COVID world? Hopefully that doesn't last for too long, but how have you been doing it, or how do you recommend that others do it?
So, I mean, my point of view is there's this term called ikigai. I don't know if you know it in Japanese term. And what it is it's kind of like you look at what you're good at, what the world needs, what you love, and there's this intersection. And I think people are
Hmm.
always battling, trying to find this state where you have this harmonious tension. And I think part of the way that you can really take advantage, because that's in that state, I think you really create like a huge amount of value. Imagine if you're doing exactly what you love, you're really good at it, the market has a need for it.
Hmm.
It's just like this beautiful point in time. You can't always do it, so you're kind of, what you can do is you can understand what you love. You can learn more and more about what you love, and sometimes learning that is learning what you don't like. You experiment. You can learn about what you're good at and your skills. So I would say, my old one of my coaches in high school used to say, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So
Hmm.
you can constantly prepare and get your skills. You can learn a lot about yourself. You survey the market, and then there can be a turn. And when that turn happens, you got to take advantage of it. But the only thing you can really do is work on the variables you can control,
Hmm.
and that such that when things happen outside of your control, you are in an optimal position to leap on them.
It's a great breakdown. I love it. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. What was it like? This is more personal than anything. What was it like operating a fund? Like I've done my fair share of reading. I've read Brad Feld and all the books that are recommended, and learning about kind of how VC funds operate and stuff like that. But I'd love to hear a little bit more of what was it like? I mean, any behind the scenes stuff or any misconceptions that might exist? Would love to hear more about that 6 year period.
Sure. So at Expo in particular, we're builders helping builders. So Garrett had started Uber. Actually, I have another Canadian partner, Maloon Tesovic, who had founded Metrolyrics.
Hmm.
And we'd all met while building, or at least tangentially through that. And we wanted to help those other people who are like-minded entrepreneurs. And we had ideas too that we wanted to build in partnership with them.
Hmm.
And when it was just like in some ways very similar to a startup, because we had to find our product market fit. We had to
Hmm.
find that intersection of what we were good at, what we love to do as well. And so there was a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error. But what's interesting about a venture platform versus a company, at a company, you have an organization structure where there's a CEO and everyone reports to them. And that CEO is subject to they work at the discretion of the board of directors. In a venture partnership, it's not the same way. You have a bunch of people who are trying to work together in partnership. And of course, there are in certain areas, okay, one person might be more accountable than the other, or maybe one person has like a final call on the way capital works and whatnot. But ultimately, trying to move forward and collaborate is a very different in that structure than it is in others. And I think getting
Hmm.
to know that from the inside was really transformational for me, because it helped me understand the other side of the table a little bit. And then also working with entrepreneurs when you have to give them a check and they're making mistakes, and understanding what it's like to have not one but many of those folks talking to you in different stages of life cycle, and what your psychology is at that time. And how, I mean, we came from a position, in my opinion, deeply, I believe this, that we really wanted them to succeed. We had a human connection with them. We'd often make decisions, I think, to our deficit, frankly, as a fund, to help the entrepreneur, because we believed in the long run that was the right thing to do and that would work out. And so far it has.
Hmm.
But getting on the other side of the table, I think entrepreneurs sometimes believe. well, sorry, I shouldn't say they sometimes believe, but there's this misconception that, okay, venture people are investors, there's a certain way they behave. And at the end of the day, they're just people trying to be happy. When they invest in you, they want you to be successful. They believe that. They've deeply convicted that, put their reputation on the line
Right.
for sometimes 10 years. And so just understanding that psychology has helped me now that I'm back in operating so that I can have more respect, have a greater sense of collaboration, understand what to communicate with them. It was really awesome.
Awesome. And okay. And so can you talk a little bit about then how the idea for Collective came to be? Was it something that came up within Expa? Was it you just getting the itch to get back into being a co-founder yourself? Would love to hear more about how that kind of evolved, or even just came to be from the beginning.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So I would say from my point of view, I in my career I've always helped and been passionate about helping businesses succeed. So at Add we helped our 15 million businesses succeed by driving more traffic and engagement through our platform. Then at Expo, I was helping venture-backed businesses succeed through capital, through advisory. We had our 60 some companies that we helped. And throughout that, I learned one thing: doing your finances suck. Accounting,
Mm-hmm.
taxes, even compliance, they're all necessary, but they're not sufficient. And it's one thing when you're in a venture-backed company, but when you're a very small business, these can be very painful and sometimes deadly. And so I started to think about this concept of like, how do you commoditize this? How do you make this a platform so that people can go to one place and just point and click their business, into existence, so to speak? So I started thinking about starting that, and I did miss operating quite a bit, and so that was something that I was starting to incubate. Now, a couple of years ago, I met, my one of my co-founders, Or Kaner. He's a Turkish immigrant. I'm an immigrant, but much earlier to the States. And he came from Turkey and he'd been freelancing. So think solopreneurs, business of one. And he said, that problem is so much more acute when you're one person because think about it, you're never going to that's never going to go away by design. If you're a
Mm-hmm.
solopreneur, you're never going to grow. The point is to have a really an amazing business that gives you the lifestyle you want to afford. But part of it is you don't want to manage those people. You don't want to deal with that stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we came together, and I remember he came in, he was pitching us. We didn't know each other that well, and I said, "This is either going to be the best meeting of your life or the worst meeting of your life, because I want to build this too." And we
Mm-hmm.
ended up spending a lot of time together. We met our third co-founder, Bora, and we kind of decided to work on this together, and that was the genesis of it. And the idea, ultimately manifested. The vision for the company is pretty simply for Collective. How do you focus on your passion, not your paperwork? Okay.
Right.
Can we give you a platform, the tools and technology, and the people online, no going anywhere, so that your business is on autopilot, right? Because if you're ultimately like a software developer or you're a designer or you're a marketing consultant or you're a realtor even, you should focus on your core. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what we wanted to do. And so we designed the first, what we call online back office. So again,
Hmm.
accounting, tax formation, and we'll add more services. So for just designed for those solopreneurs, just designed for those businesses of one.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've now had to do bookkeeping for two small businesses, and I have it in my calendar. First, monthly bookkeeping, and it sucks. Now I use QuickBooks, and it makes it a little bit easier. But I think it's a good problem that you guys are trying to solve. Can you talk a little bit about the co-founder aspect? You said he kind of pitched you. You knew him a little bit, and then obviously you guys had similar ideas. How do people approach finding a co-founder, and then if you do happen across somebody who maybe has a similar idea or you think might be a good fit, what's a good way to make sure that they are, right? Like, did you guys spend weeks talking? Did you work together as like a trial run for a few months? Or how do you recommend people approach just even the idea or the potential of co-founders?
So I think when you're looking at a co-founder relationship, you got to approach it in some part like a marriage, because you are ultimately giving birth to a company, and
Mm-hmm.
you have to steward that company together through thick and thin. And sometimes you have, and actually statistically, you probably won't work on it together for the life of the company. One person may leave, both of you may leave. If it's very successful, that's actually what ends up happening quite a bit. And so you have to have a person that you can communicate with in a way that's very open, it's very direct, it's very collaborative. And yeah, I think you have to see how they are in situations of success, but also in situations of conflict. And ultimately, to do that, I think you have to get to know them pretty well. So we spent weeks together, and our initial relationship was I would say very different than where we are today, where we're like working together day to day, full time. We started working together more part time, getting to know one another. And I think people should put time to it. Too often, I think people do the resume marriage, where, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you were at this company, I'm at this company. We both want to start something together and go and do it. Doesn't mean it's not going to work, but you wouldn't get married that way.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, you have to view this as that deep of a relationship. I mean, in some ways, it can be more traumatic if there's separation, because there's a lot of capital involved and frankly could potentially have a lot of psychological ego involved if there's a separation. So I would say that's my advice, is just make sure you feel good about it. If you don't feel good at the beginning, chances are you won't feel great at the end.
Right. Yeah, that's really good advice. And so, what has it been like the second time through? Is it any? I'm sure it is a little bit easier. I mean, you mentioned you have the experience, probably easier to get funded. Some of the difficulties, maybe you've been through something similar before or very close to before. But or maybe another way to put this is, how much of an advantage is it having been through this experience once before?
I would say, for the most part, I think it's net positive for me. I think there's a stability, a sense of mental calm that you get because you've seen some of those patterns, not
Mm-hmm.
only as an operator, but when you've invested in so many companies, you realize that other founders and companies go through this is quote unquote normal.
Mm-hmm.
So that stability is great. The access to capital, the access to a network, the experience, obviously, of knowing how to do certain things is great. But as I mentioned before, the circumstances here are unprecedented in the current state of the world. And so I would say the thing that probably gave me the most preparation, and I use that word very cautiously, was running the business through the recession, my last business through the recession, because, it was a quick, unexpected turn for the worse. The environment was much harder. We had to think very differently, very quickly. You have your entire company under strain from a circumstance out of control. And so how do you work with people when ultimately you cannot promise or commit to them anything about the external environment, and yet you need to make plans because you have investors, because they need to get paid? It's not like because the environment is challenging, all of a sudden say, well, I'm okay not getting paid, or I'm okay not knowing what to do day to day. So
Mm-hmm.
that training was really useful for me personally. But humbly, it's been a real challenge. But with Collective, I think what we've seen, it's been really great, is uh, the solopreneur world is rising, right? A lot
Mm-hmm.
of companies are large companies are starting to hire more contractors versus versus full time, because they're not sure about the environment. And so a lot of our businesses, we call them members, that are on our platform are thriving, and also there's a huge growth in demand there. And ultimately, one thing that has been super satisfying for us, Josh, is in the US, if you form your business as an S corp, you can save a tremendous amount of money, but it's very hard. You have to run your back office in a certain way, and so
Mm-hmm.
that is why we work, so hard to do that, because we can save, $16,000 a month if you're making, or $16,000 a year for some of our members. So giving that money back now feels great.
For sure. And you got to think that there is a shift, even pre-COVID, right? Before COVID, a shift of a lot of people just say, hey, you know what? I can work from my laptop. I don't want to go into offices. I want the flexibility. Corporations want lower overhead, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say, like, COVID has even just put that kind of movement on steroids, which is it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Awesome. So, Hooman, I can't let you go without asking specifically about fundraising, right? That's a topic that, I mean, tech, a little bit more popular these days, becoming a tech founder. You talked about the incubators, and what I, especially in certain subreddits and, all the different websites and forums, fundraising is an interesting topic to say the least. Do you have any tips or recommendations on people who maybe they're thinking about starting a company to begin with, what you recommend to kind of even just think about, or how to approach fundraising, and or if somebody has a company, they have some traction, any tips or advice on approaching fundraising in general? It's kind of
There's a
broad,
lot.
but yeah,
There's a
that
lot.
if you
I
could
would
boil it
say
down to maybe 2 or 3 points, yeah.
if you're a first-time founder, I think what I would say is get to know people, right? Use your common sense.
Mm-hmm.
Being an investor, and I use the analogy of marriage for founders, it's not that dissimilar. So, being an investor is a funny thing because you have to move quickly. You have to be fast and slow in some ways that are really challenging. So, you have to move fast because often really competitive deals move quickly,
Right.
but you end up having to wait 10 years for those deals to work out.
Right.
And so it's uncomfortable. But what you can do to mitigate some of the strain for the investor and for yourself, frankly, because you want to make sure you're working with someone that you can see a long-term relationship with both the partner and the firm, start to reach out, curate, and get to know your network earlier so that when you go out for your fundraise, you are going to some people that know you, they've been tracking you, they've seen your work, they see your character, they see that there's some chemistry there between you. So that I would say that
Mm-hmm.
that's the one thing that helps a bit. Um, and then the second is remember you're selling to the investor a business, not a product. I have seen a number of
Mm.
entrepreneurs come in and they'll give me these huge decks about the product and they'll demo it and do all these things. Ultimately, the investor needs to invest in the business. So they need to see the whole picture. What's the problem you're solving? What's the solution? That's a lot of
Right.
product, but then also what's the market size? What's your go to market? What's your traction to date? How much do you want from me? They want to understand, is this investment ultimately going to be able to raise money in the next round? And so what I encourage people to do is, again, sell the company, not the product. But when you ultimately, you need to show that investor that if they give you capital A, B, C, and D, you are going to be able to get to that next round with the plan that you're presenting to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's, hey, I'm going to get to a certain revenue run rate, or whether I'm going to hire a certain team, or I'm going to release a certain product, and they can then take a educated guess and say, okay, if they can do those 3 to 5 things, right? Do I think like the next big investor is going to invest, Andreessen and Sequoia and whatnot? And
Right.
do I think that this person is the person do said 3 to 5 things? So you
Right.
just have to get into the psychology of what that person's buying. It's not dissimilar to selling to your customers as an entrepreneur, but you have to treat them as a customer, get to know them, do your discovery, make sure that they're warm. And I think sometimes people think of investors as almost like too similar to the way they think of like large scale investors. Oh, they're just giving you money and it's a deal and then they disappear. It's a very, very intense relationship, in particular when you're at the early stage, seed, A, even B.
Right. Yeah, that's great stuff. I mean, we did a small fundraise over the summer, and I was surprised. Yes, there's so much that goes into it, but at the end of the day, to me, it felt like it really came down to networking and sales. If you could kind of like boil it all down, can you get your deck and yourself in front of enough people, and can you sell the right story about your business, obviously in an accurate and convincing way. Very cool. So what's happened since you started the company? Obviously, COVID happens, and we've alluded to it a little bit. How have you guys as a team handled COVID, and maybe if we can extrapolate out from there, what recommendations can you give to others, especially in the tech space, on how we can navigate tough times, right? Because they come, right? Whether it's a recession in '08 or COVID in 2020 or the dot-com bust in the early 2000s, they come, right? Sometimes earlier than others. But what do you recommend to either prepare for or how to handle them once they do hit?
I think, one of the core values that we have a collective is we call it people first. And it was a value that I had in my first company, actually. It was our first value from my first company. And organically, actually, my co-founders and I came to that as a first value. And I think if you approach every situation with a lens of humanity and
Mm-hmm.
dignity and openness and integrity, you can navigate it. So let's apply that. What I mean is, so COVID hits and you don't know what to do. Of course, you don't know what to do. Well, who was alive when there was a worldwide global pandemic? But you didn't know it was going to be a pandemic. All you knew at that time when we were still in the office was that something bad was happening. It could get worse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of what helped us get through it was we did the best research we could. We came up with a plan that would maximize the safety and the security of our employees. We erred on that side, right? So we actually were one of the early people to shut down our office and have our employees go remote. And it's
Hmm.
challenging to go remote when you're growing rapidly. We went from 4 employees to 14, which, it's a lot in a couple of months, and then tell them to go remote. And then the
Hmm.
new employees, we had to onboard them remotely when we weren't ready. And the way that we could do that, I think, and why it ended up working out was because ultimately we would tell people, hey, look, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm trying to do the right thing for you. Here's what I think. Do you guys have feedback? Can we work on this plan together? And you work with them and you show them the full deck. You don't try to hide things. You don't try to act like you're under control. You're not in control in those situations. So when
Hmm.
you have a lot of variables and they start shifting out of your control, the way that you can create solidarity on the team is through being vulnerable and ultimately making them part of that process. And we did the same thing with some of the social unrest that occurred in the United States around, Black Lives Matter and all of the unfortunate incidents that occurred. The same thing in the wildfires. You just
Hmm.
talk to people, you try to inject some humanity, and you make plans together. Because these types of events can, as painful as they are, they can uh, force people within your tribe to get closer. And ultimately, you can leverage that as a way for all of you to get through that together. And so
Right.
that's kind of the framework I would recommend is just be humble, be open, be transparent with them, be vulnerable about what you can't control and what you can, and that you need their help to get through it.
For sure. That's great. And I like that you use the word framework because you can't write a guide on how to navigate 2020, right? It's I mean what's happened this single year is just crazy. But anyways,
It's
that's for
unprecedented.
yeah, that's for we could have a whole episode on that alone. Awesome, Human. Well, this has been really great learning about your story and some of your key lessons. You mentioned earlier on that you know lifelong learner, and I always like to ask guests about what type of resources they rely on or what type of books they prefer. You know, are you a reader, online courses, seminars? What are some of the key resources that you use to continuously learn? And maybe if you have like two or three specifically that you would recommend as well.
So I think for me, I look at there's a couple of resources. One, I'm a huge reader actually, so I try to read a book a week, and I would say one is just there's a lot of people with amazing experience before you. Try to find
Hmm.
books, for example, on not. I always start with the fundamentals, right? So you have to work on yourself, and if you're feeling good, then you can work on business advice, and then go from there. And there's some things the more you get closer to practicing within your business, I would say you have to go to more recent online resources. But I'd say from a personal point of view, I read a lot of Stoicism, so Marcus Aurelius Meditations, um, Epictetus, the manual. So those are great guides on how to work on your own mental frameworks, the way you view life, and how your philosophy, because that ultimately will lead. It's almost like the core OS for how I deal with problems and how I deal with anything. And then on top of that, there's professional things that are going to make you productive, whether it's like, getting things done or 7 habits of highly effective people or checklist manifesto. Those are ways that you become productive. That's kind of the base. When you go
Hmm.
higher up, I'd say there's great business books, on how to, I would say frameworks to use, like managing OKRs, Measure What Matters by John Doerr is a good one. But ultimately, I think my combo is I read quite a bit because then I can understand it, and then I try to find the best people who've been in similar situations, and I'll ask them. I'll say, okay, hey, how are you running your company right now? Do you use OKRs? What do you put in spreadsheets? Use tools?
Hmm.
Be just try to identify what the most important things are to you. And people are out there, and oftentimes the beauty of the internet, obviously, is they document it, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they'll say, oh, hey, I wrote a post on some things you can do on our business OS, but if they don't, get on the phone with them.
Awesome. Yeah. No, that's great advice. Awesome, Hooman. Well, it's been great to have you on the show. Appreciate you sharing more of your backstory and all these great tips and takeaways. If people want to learn a little bit more about Collective or you, where are some places that you recommend that they check you out?
Yeah, so our website is collective.com, and just to recap, we're building the first back office designed for these business of one. A lot of people who are listening to this, we basically want to do the paperwork so you can focus on your core passion and whatever your business is. And we're based in the U.S. We're working with U.S. based companies for now. Hopefully, we'll be able to expand to Canada, other countries as well soon. But right now, that's where we're based. And if you're there and you want some help with that back office, go to collective.com. Easy enough to remember. You can find us on the internet as well. And I will say one thing, regardless of whether you work with us or, you come up with your own DIY solution, with Collective, you get QuickBooks, then it comes with the package. You get Gusto comes with the package. Personal business taxes come with it that we
Oh
do
wow.
for you. And we'll do all your compliance and we'll form your entity. But the one thing I would say is if you're, for example, making in the States 80K, 100K or more, go get an S Corp, get an S Corp. We're saving so much money, Josh. It's insane for these people. It's thousands of dollars. So, if you want to work with us, it's a good case because you have a team online that, ultimately can do that for you and give you the software tools and set up that back office. So, we kind of call it peace of mind that pays, right? So we're
Hmm.
going to do all that dirty work, but you actually make more money than what we charge. But if you are interested in that, if you're a DIY person, you want to set up all of I'm going to get my own business bank set up, I'm going to get my own EIN, I'm going to do format. There's a lot to do, but if you want to do
Hmm.
that, I really recommend it because there's 3 or 4 million people in the U.S. who are making 100K or more. There are, I'd say 15 to 20 billion dollars on the table waiting for you every year to just take that. So I would
Right.
encourage people to research that. And then if you have any questions, we're Collective on LinkedIn, and let us know. We'll tell you. We're more passionate about those entrepreneurs being successful and getting their money back than them even working with us.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head because, I mean, I've been fortunate that I took tax law in school. And so as my business was growing, I kind of knew what to look for and what numbers, at what point to incorporate. Obviously, it's a little bit different in Canada, but, at what points to do what things. But even for me and for most people, it's very confusing, right? And then to have to go out and pay, even if it's just for a consultation for a tax accountant or a tax lawyer and this and that and the other, and it adds up. So
Oh yeah, it adds up. I mean, think about it this way: like QuickBooks and Gusto alone, if you want to do your payroll, for your business and QuickBooks, I mean, you're talking probably in the magnitude of $100. You want to go incorporate your company in the U.S., especially in S corp, that's $800 that
hmm,
first year. So in that first year alone, I mean, when you're looking at it, it's about 2 grand. Our
hmm,
total service costs 2,400, and we give you all that. Plus, you have a
hmm,
finance team in the cloud. We're doing your accounting. I mean, it's
right.
it's just a no-brainer. That said, again, I'm more passionate about them doing it, running it well, because there's just so much money left to the table. And in this time with COVID and with, you're just struggling. Like, imagine having an extra couple grand in your pocket. I mean, that's
Hmm.
so for us, it's a mission and a movement. And I encourage everyone to do that. And if you have questions, I'm at Hooman Radfar on Twitter. You can come to me. We'll push you to the right resources. We have plenty of articles on S corps and the benefits. You should learn about it.
Awesome. And so I'll include links to that in the description. There also is a discount that Collective is offering, I believe. So if you use our code, I think it's Solopreneur Grind 50, you'll get 2 months your first 2 months will be at 50% off. So we will mention all of that in the description, whether you're listening to this on as a podcast or watching it on YouTube. Human, thanks very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Love what you guys are doing, and thanks for sharing all the information.
Thanks for having me, Josh. I really appreciate it. It was fun. And if we can ever be of help to this community, let us know. We love it. We love being part of it.